right. It is my pleasure to introduce Joni Mincher from our pre-employment check unit. Joni, take it away.
Thank you, Davin. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. As Davin said, I am going to be covering the working with pre-employment checks for the service providers, and we'll be going through a program overview, the staff exclusion list check, authorized person responsibilities, and then Andrew Hartman, who is our director of the criminal background check unit, will be talking to you about the CBC determination. So the criminal background check unit is responsible for handling staff exclusion list checks, as well as the criminal background checks. That information is available on our website under providers and staff and pre-employment checks, as you can see on your slide. So who must be checked? For a staff exclusion list check, it requires anyone who is going to have regular and substantial contact with individuals receiving services. And for the criminal background check, it requires regular and substantial unsupervised, unrestricted contact with individuals receiving services. Unsupervised contact is not permitted until the results of the checks are received. Who may request the check? An authorized person must be designated to do these checks. Designation forms can be found on the SEL and CBC guidance and resources pages for the Justice Center's website. So how do you designate an AP to conduct the SEL checks? You would need to send the completed form to the Justice Center with a sworn statement and signature of the agency directors. APs will be granted access to the VPCR within 1 or 2 business days of the submission. This is an example of that AP designation form. Again, that can be found on our website under pre-employment checks, SEL, and then resources. So once the AP has been set up to conduct those checks, the AP will receive a link with the SEL online web form and instructions on how that form should be completed. Any questions regarding submitting SEL checks or the form itself should be submitted to our SEL check mailbox. The address is on your screen. So how do you designate an AP for the criminal background check system? Again, you would send the completed and notarized form to the Justice Center with a sworn statement and signature of your agency director. The AP will receive their access within 3 to 4 business days. What we provide to them is their user ID as well as a temporary password. Here again is an example of the form, which can be found on our website. Using the CBC system, as I said, the AP will receive an email with their credentials, including a link to the login screen, their user ID, temporary password, and a user guide. Questions for the CBC system can be sent to cbc@justicecenter.ny.gov. When authorized person changes occur, You need to keep us updated as soon as possible when those changes happen. And there is an authorized person ratification form, again, on our website that you can submit to the CBC mailbox for processing. And here is an example of that form. Pretty easy to fill out. So now we'll move on to the staff exclusion or SEL checks. So prior to sending an applicant for fingerprinting, the SEL check must be done. The AP must certify that the SEL check has been completed. You can review the SEL job aid. There is guidance on our website, and then you can submit the SEL check online via the web form. This is what the authorized person sign-in screen looks like. So you would put in your email address and click the SEL check button, then hit next. Submitting the web form requires the applicant to have a social security number or alien registration number. APs will be granted access to the CBC system within 3 or 4 business days of submission. There is the ability to submit batch forms as well. You can submit up to 100 applicants using the staff exclusion list batch check template, which is available to you after you sign into the web form for processing. Each online check request generates a unique confirmation number. Authorized person will receive a response within 1 business day. It's important to note here that it is not necessary to submit multiple SEL checks for the same person within a short period of time. If you do not receive an immediate response, that means it does require a staff member to look at it, and you will receive a response within 1 business day. So now we have some responsibilities for our authorized persons. So you need to check the SEL. That has to be done the first thing before you set the applicant up for fingerprinting. Provide the applicant information. So there is a information form that you can have the applicant fill out that you will need to have available to you when you set up the fingerprinting appointment. You register your applicant for fingerprinting. You update employment statuses in the CBC system. You main all your application records and information, and ensure you have a CBC policy. So your application information, ensure the applicants complete the consent form for fingerprinting. Provide the applicant with the personal criminal history information review sheet. Complete the fingerprint applicant information sheet. You register for fingerprinting with Identigo either online or by calling the 855-845-7434 telephone number shown. And the required information would be their current address, demographic information, and specific job duties. The request must provide specific job duties, including how the applicant will have contact with people receiving services. So below is an example of what those job duties would look like. Applicant will have regular and substantial unsupervised contact with individuals receiving services in a direct care setting and will assist with activities of daily living. Is just an example. So we have some guidance available on our website. It gives you the fingerprint registration guidance, as well as Identigo links and service codes for OMH, OCFS, and OPWDD. There is guidance again on our website with regard to registering your applicant. And it would be the same information, fingerprint registration guide and the Identigo links. So your records retention rules, your applicant consent forms, your CBC results and arrest notifications must be maintained for 6 years after the subject is no longer employed or volunteers. Another role of the authorized person is you would update the employment status. APs must update employment status of subject individuals in the CB system within 14 days of any change. Each provider should have a policy designed to implement the provisions of the Justice Center's CBC regulation.
Go on, Joni. I'll finish after this. I'm sorry.
Okay. For your consideration, please see the draft sample CBC policy and procedure on our website.
Joni, we've received one question. For SEL checks, do you run them with the candidate's current name only? What about if they have a maiden name or had another name previously?
I have seen providers submit multiple SEL checks for the same person, date of birth, social security number, just with different names. So they can run them in different names and get the result as well.
Okay, thank you. Let me just see. Okay, what happens when you are reviewing clearances and you see that it says they are not hired or not employed, but that has been the clearance for a period of time? Would they have to redo it or just change the status? Is that enough for you to answer that question? I just read it as I saw it. I'm a little confused myself.
I think I might need a little more information to be able to answer that.
Okay, I think the person who asked this question, we do have contact information. There's lots of emails that have already been supplied, so I would suggest that you do that. Is the retention period for the forms based on statute?
I am not sure on that question.
I'm betting it is. I think there's an attorney near you. I bet that's what the attorney would say too. And last, is it a requirement to run the maiden name for staff exclusion list checks?
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you, Joni. One question was, how does the AP demonstrate to the compliance officer that an SEL check was done monthly?
My suggestion for that would be to keep a printout of the confirmation that they receive when the SEL check is submitted.
Okay. And the last question is, will doing a batch SEL submission provide multiple confirmation numbers per individual?
Multiple confirmation numbers per individual. I don't believe so. I believe each individual in a batch is given its own confirmation number.
Okay, great, thank you. There's a question about the CBC process, but I'm gonna hold that because I bet it'll be answered coming up. So take it away, Andrew.
Thank you, Davin. Thank you, Joni. My name is Andrew Hartman. I'm the director of the background check unit. and I'm going to take you through this different CBC determinations that come through in the system so that you can have a better idea of what you're receiving and what responsibilities you may have when you get those determinations. So there are three types of determinations that I'll be covering. The first is the broadest category of non-denials, as well as hold and abeyances, and then denials. First category is not denied. So you may find an individual has a status in the CBC of non-ident or no criminal history. This means when it's a non-ident that they've never been fingerprinted before, or there's no reportable criminal history, and the applicant may be considered for employment when you see that. So when you see non-ident, it means they've never been printed before. No criminal history usually means that there is something, but it doesn't qualify as a misdemeanor or a felony. So the individual doesn't have criminal history. So the Justice Center receives two rap sheets. We receive a New York State criminal history, and we receive a combined response from the FBI, which is both out of state and federal criminal history. Now, for New York State, we're allowed to share on our determination letters the criminal history contained in New York State. For federal or out of state criminal history, we are not allowed to share that on our determination letters. And so a frequent question we have is, that's great, you've cleared this individual and you've sent us this letter that says that there's nothing in New York State, but how are we supposed to know if this individual if we should hire this person? The first thing you can do is you can consult the consent form, because they're required to include all convictions and pending arrests, regardless of the state or whether it's federal or New York State. So that's the first place to consult. You can ask the applicant, and if you continue to have some trouble with that question, you can have the applicant contact the Justice Center, and we would be happy to, in many cases, refresh their recollection. But when you get the not denied criminal history, the applicant may be considered for employment. This is a clearance. You can go ahead and hire them. A circumstance which we call insufficient court-supplied information. So what I would imagine, the way that I would conceptualize this for you is there's an arrest, and let's say it's from a remote part of Alabama, and it's from a long time ago, and the Justice Center tries to call, and we don't get any information, and we can't say for sure whether this case has a disposition or not, but were the applicant to have been convicted of this arrest, which we can't perfect, we wouldn't consider denying them. So what we're saying is, this is a clearance, this is an arrest, we can't verify that it's pending, but this individual has an arrest and we can move forward. There's no disposition, we don't know, we haven't been able to perfect it, so we're making the call that you can go ahead and hire the person, because the arrest is either too long ago, or it does not bear a direct relationship between the job description and the arrest for it to be really worth pursuing further. And we can get into hold and abeyances later, but insufficient court-supplied information means arrest, we're not that concerned about it. You can go ahead and hire the person. Now, not held in abeyance is similar, but in this case, we have a pending criminal charge. And this pending criminal charge is of the sort where we're not concerned about this charge, and you can go ahead and hire the individual because it's just a pending charge of a minor. It's a minor offense, and we're not going to wait for the finality of the case to go ahead and clear it. It's up to you. But not held in advances are not of. We're simply saying, yeah, there's a pending charge, but we're not that concerned about it, and you can make a decision, but we're clearing them. Now we get to hold in advances. There are two types of hold in advances. So when there's a pending felony offense, the Justice Center is required to hold in abeyance. And that means that the individual has a charge. In one case, it's a felony, and we're required to hold up the application until the individual obtains a disposition of how the case has been resolved. Now, what a lot of providers do is they misinterpret that to mean that the application is over. That's not the case. If you're interested in hiring this individual, you need to wait until the case has been resolved. So keep them in applied status and wait for the individual to get a disposition, and we'll get into how to go about that process. But in the one case, there's a pending felony in which we're required to hold in abeyance. In the second case, there's a misdemeanor in which we're using our discretion to say that there's a direct relationship between the charge and the job duties, and so we're choosing to. So that would be, there's an assault third degree from 2 months ago. This person is applying for a DSP position. We're going to utilize our discretion to hold in abeyance, in which case, if you're interested in them, keep them in applied status, have them get a disposition, and bring it to you, and then we will review it at that point. But don't update to not hired, and then tell them to call the Justice Center, and then say, why did you deny us employment? We didn't. We didn't. You need to keep them in applied status and follow through with the process. Applicants held in abeyance cannot be hired in a direct care position. We need to wait for the a updated determination by the Justice Center. So hiring decisions and a pending charge. If you're considering hiring them, you must obtain a court disposition submitted to the CBC unit. So what we're asking for is the applicant to go to the clerk of the court to obtain a disposition from the clerk with a raised seal, an official document, and have them give it to the provider. The provider will mail it to our PO box, and then we can review it at that time. If you've decided that you don't want to wait for the individual to go through the criminal justice system and get a disposition, then we ask that you update the employment status to application withdrawn. Denials. When the CBC is updated to denial, the provider may not hire the applicant in the direct care position from which the CBC was requested. The provider will be notified of the decision via correspondence uploaded into the CBC system. What's the provider role? You're required to notify the applicant that employment was denied and that their criminal history was the basis of the denial. You must furnish a copy of the reported criminal history summary upon written request from the applicant. Status update, none being processed. So when you see none being processed in the CBC, means that a determination has not been issued on the applicant's suitability for employment, and you may not hire the applicant in the position for which the CBC was requested. The provider may only move forward with a hiring decision if a determination has been issued for the applicant. there are two scenarios in which you'll get a none being processed. In the first, the applicant's criminal history record includes a criminal charge for which the CBC unit cannot determine the disposition, and we may have reached out to the applicant to provide disposition information on the charges. So if I were given an example to illustrate this, let's say there's an applicant who has a assault arrest on a military base. Now, it's very difficult for our staff. Now we'd likely be interested in finding the disposition for that charge, but it may be difficult for us to go about finding how to get the disposition for that charge. So we may contact the applicant directly and say, this is showing up on your rap sheet. Can you provide us the disposition information? And in that instance, you would get a none being processed until we receive the disposition information directly from that applicant. Yeah, and we're requesting the applicant to provide us with a disposition. In the second scenario, the CBC unit is considering directing the provider to deny employment based on an applicant's criminal history, and we are requesting evidence of rehabilitation directly from the applicant.
Hi, Andrew. There's just been a couple questions. In the case where an applicant denies having a criminal history, despite a determination that there was a history, is the provider required to make the applicant ask the Justice Center what the conviction is and report that response back to the provider?
They aren't required to. During the beginning of the printing process, they are required to get a personal criminal history review form. And that form basically allows the individual to challenge their criminal history if they're claiming that there's a mistake on the record. And so that's one way for them to go about it. They can also contact us to have us review the rap sheet. And in the case where it's out of state criminal history and the provider doesn't know the nature of we have a determination, but the provider doesn't know what the nature of the charges or convictions are, they could contact us. We can speak with the individual and we can go over their rap sheet with them.
Thank you. This person, I think, is seeking some clarity. If you could just clarify, if the candidate provides us with a disposition, if they're held in abeyance, is it the provider's job to send the disposition to the Justice Center, or is it the candidate's job?
It's the providers. And the reason for that is a lot of times individuals have pending charges and we do a hold in abeyance. And, you know, we found that sometimes the providers really aren't interested in hiring this individual. And so what we're having them do is we're having them show a little buy-in to this individual. And so they will provide that to us and kind of say, we see the charge, we see how it was disposed of, we're presenting the disposition to you, and we are interested in moving forward with this person.
Okay, thank you. What is considered evidence of rehabilitation?
You know, when the individual gets what we call a reach out response, there's an information page that we provide that shows them types of evidence of rehabilitation. Now, broadly speaking, this would involve, it often involves a personal statement in which the individual is acknowledging the nature of the criminal history and their appreciation for the crime and their attempts at rehabilitation. Anything involving work history, anything involving certificates of completion of behavior modification, where they show where, you know, if you have an assault conviction, that you've taken anger management courses, something relating to the offense. Personal references to show that you have support in the community. References from the provider can be very helpful because that demonstrates that they are familiar with this individual and they are vouching for them for employment. These that's a number of them, but it's not an exhaustive list.
Thank you. With the distinctions that you talked about with none being processed, how will the provider know the distinction? Will they receive an email, you know, as the authorized person as to which scenario fits?
They don't. No. That is just one designation, and no, you won't know which, because it's a direct communication with the applicant.
Okay. And then regarding insufficient court-supplied information or not held in abeyance, since the provider can hire the applicant, what happens if the Justice Center gets an update?
I think there's a misperception that the Justice Center is this sort of repository of criminal history and that we get these regular updates. We really don't. We have people printed when they apply for a position and then we receive a rap sheet then. We really don't receive regular updates. It's a single serving issue where the person is applying for a position, we get a rap sheet, we make a determination, we get rid of the rap sheet. So we're not getting updates. I know sometimes providers will say, well, there was this, you cleared them and there was this an arrest. Well, that case was resolved a certain way. We're not really going to change anything because we just, there's no point to. But no, we don't get updates on criminal history.
Okay, thank you. And then last question. What if someone committed a crime like assault of a police officer, but then was given a pardon? Would providers know any of that, or would you find out about that?
Well, that's tricky. Let's take that one offline.
Okay, that's a one to contact the criminal background check unit.
Yes, we will.
And
Yes.
they will parse through all of those difficult situations with you and discuss what the job is and all of those good things.
Yeah.
So, okay, take it away.
Okay. Status update, criminal history, next steps. Evidence of rehabilitation, good timing for this one to show up. So the request is sent via certified mail to the address provided during the fingerprinting registration process. Before considering a denial of employment, the CBC unit shall request evidence of rehabilitation from the applicant based on their criminal history. This request is sent via certified mail to the address provided during the fingerprinting registration process. I'll take a moment here to make the point that it's very important for providers to have more than one, and if possible, several authorized persons who are active authorized persons. And it's important because, especially when it comes to mail and when it comes to sending out requests for evidence of rehabilitation, we really need active authorized persons who are engaged and can respond to us, because often individuals don't respond to their mail. And so we need to send them, we send a notice for a resend. And if the authorized persons aren't active, then the process stops. So that's why it's really important not only to have a good address for the applicants going from the outset, but it's important to have multiple authorized persons who are updated and active in the system, particularly for this process. Request is unclaimed or undeliverable. We will contact the authorized person with the following. So we send out a letter, and the applicant, we receive a return to sender. The letter is sent back to us. We get notification of status of the certified mail. Notice that the background check process will not continue pending action by the authorized person. Notice that the criminal history has been uploaded to the CBC system for review by the authorized person, and instructions for resending the letter. Now, it's not enough for you to say, to respond to this and say, this is the correct address, and we're interested in moving on with the background check process. Of course you are. But what we're asking is that you have reviewed the criminal history and that you are interested in hiring this individual in a direct support position. That's a different thing. So if you say to us, yes, the address is correct and please continue with what you're doing, we are going to get a pointed email back asking that you have reviewed the criminal history and that despite that, you are still interested in moving forward with this individual. If after reviewing the criminal history, the provider wants to hire the applicant, the authorized person must email the CBC unit with a verified address and request that the letter be resent. If the provider is not interested in hiring, the authorized person must update the CBC system to indicate the subject individual was not hired. Subsequent arrest. CBC will notify the authorized person, and the provider shall protect the health, safety, and welfare of persons receiving services and update the CBC system with employment status. So really, our subsequent arrests are a courtesy that we provide. Our staff receives the arrest notices and then sends them and uploads them for the provider, but the provider is required to make a safety assessment based on their state oversight agency. It has nothing to do with the Justice Center. You don't need to send us updates on the charges. You need to do the safety assessment based upon the instructions of your own state oversight agency. We simply send them out. Applied status and arrest notices. Provider will not receive an arrest notification when applicant remains in applied status for 3 months or more. Notification will only be sent after the provider confirms current employment status. The provider will receive email informing them the arrest information is available pending update to applicant status. Temporary approval. Providers must have a policy regarding temporary approval of an individual. Temporary approval pending results of the criminal background check may only occur after fingerprinting has been completed. So don't just put the person immediately in temporary approval. You must have a policy for conditional hiring. The policy shall require that temporary approved applicants are supervised by management or someone deemed qualified to provide oversight, and always in the presence of the supervisor while such personal care activities occur. The provider may not conditionally hire anyone with a history including felony sex offense, a felony within the past 10 years involving violence, abandoning a child and or endangering the welfare of an incompetent, physically disabled or vulnerable elderly person, or any comparable offense in any other jurisdiction. So for more background check guidance, you can visit our website for these guidance documents for OMH, OPWDD, OCFS, and for the criminal background check user guide.
Thank you, Andrew. I have 2 questions. In the case where the applicant doesn't remember their out-of-state criminal history, is the provider required to call the Justice Center so that then the Justice Center can call the applicant and tell them of their rap sheet, or is that just considered an option?
It's good. They're not required to. It's just considered an option.
Okay. And what status should we use if we have results and then have the person has not yet started? I'm assuming they're hired. Sorry, I just got this question in and I can't, I'm gonna.
So we've
yeah.
made a determination and they haven't started yet.
Yes, hired. What status should we use if we have the results and then they're hired, but they haven't yet started? Do you care about the start date of the staff person? Do we?
They should be updated to hired.
Okay.
Sometimes people play around the start date. I mean, I guess I would need to know more about how long it is between the determination and the decision to hire the person.
What is your recommendation if the candidate does not disclose criminal history? Is a memo to file to document the reasons sufficient? Do you want the candidate to complete a new consent form?
I think that's really a matter for the individual provider and your counsel.
Okay. All right. You have 14 days to update the website, whether you'll be hiring them or not. Is that correct?
No, it's 14 days from a status change,
Okay,
not
Thank
from the date of printing. It's from you've changed. So the person we make a determination, you decide to hire, you have 14 days to update the system.
okay. And what if a person you hire and then they ghost you? They don't show up at orientation. What does the provider need to do then?
I don't know if the CBC really has I don't think we have an opinion on that.
Okay.
That's your employee at that point. If they've passed the background check, whether they show up or not is really on them.
Okay. All right. That's the last question. Again, we have, I think we have all this contact information coming up on the next slide, right? You can scan there and remember, you'll be getting all of this at the conclusion of the summit. So here's all the different ways that you can contact Andrew and Joni with your questions, and they will get back to you as soon as possible.